I never expected a simple bus ride to turn into the most unforgettable day of my life. I arrived at my wife's family home, stepping off the bus in my ordinary clothes, carrying only a small bag and a quiet confidence. The moment they saw me, their laughter filled the air, mocking, dismissive, sharp. It wasn't just teasing. It was the kind of laughter that makes a man feel small, as if he didn't belong anywhere in their polished world. I kept my head high, walked inside, and let them enjoy their amusement. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I didn't try to impress them with words. I simply moved with quiet confidence, letting my presence speak for itself. Inside, the house was alive with their chatter, their judgment, their subtle smirks and glances. Each one seemed carefully calculated to remind me of where they thought I belonged, at the bottom. And yet, I stayed calm. I knew something they didn't. I knew that appearances can be deceiving, and quiet patience can change everything. Hours passed, and eventually, we arrived at the auction. The room was filled with wealthy collectors, fine art, and high stakes. I walked in silently, unassuming, unnoticed at first. The same people who had laughed at my bus ride stared as I entered. Something had shifted. I held my head high as the auctioneer began. I didn't rush. I didn't show emotion. I didn't boast. But when the bids began, I revealed exactly why they had underestimated me. One lot after another, the value of my bids shocked the room. Gasps replaced laughter. Whispers replaced smirks. The same family that mocked me just hours ago now watched in stunned silence. Their confidence, their arrogance, their laughter, all gone. And in that moment, I realized the power of patience, humility, and strategic action. Sometimes, being underestimated is not a weakness. Sometimes, it is the perfect way to make everyone see your true worth all at once. By the time the auction ended, the family's silence spoke louder than words ever could. They had witnessed the truth firsthand. Never judge a person by their bus ride, their clothes, or the way they arrive. What matters is what they do when the stakes are high, and I had just shown them. I had never felt so out of place in my life, not even during my first day at college or my first big job interview. The bus hissed to a stop, and I climbed down slowly, adjusting the strap of my leather satchel. My clothes were simple, nothing flashy, nothing that would demand attention, and yet I knew the moment my wife's family saw me, they would scrutinize every detail, every fold, every wrinkle, every choice would be dissected before I even moved a step forward. The front steps of their house seemed taller than ever. My father-in-law leaned slightly on the railing, his eyes squinting, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. My mother-in-law's gaze was sharp, calculating, following my movement, as though she could weigh my entire worth in a single glance. Cousins whispered to each other, pointing subtly, their laughter hidden behind polite smiles. "Arrived by bus?" one cousin muttered. "Really? Is this his best effort?" I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I kept my posture straight and my stride steady. Each step was deliberate, measured, a small defiance against the silent judgment that weighed the air. They expected embarrassment. They expected hesitation. They expected me to bow to their scrutiny. I did none of that. I walked up the steps with calm confidence, letting the quiet assertiveness speak louder than any word could. Inside, the house hummed with the subtle chaos of a family accustomed to control. Polished floors, soft lighting, and neatly arranged furniture projected wealth and order. And yet, that order was infused with judgment. Eyes flickered toward me with curiosity and veiled contempt. My wife greeted me with a polite nod, her expression neutral but alert. She knew what was coming, the silent test of patience, composure, and confidence. The initial minutes were tense, filled with small talk and subtly probing questions. Aunts and uncles asked about my work in a tone that was simultaneously polite and mocking. "How was your commute?" an aunt asked, her lips tight with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "The bus was fine," I replied evenly. "It gave me a chance to see the city on my way here." A stifled laugh rose from the back. I ignored it, letting my calm demeanor demonstrate the quiet confidence they had not expected. Hours passed with the same undercurrent of tension. Each glance, each murmur, each polite question was a test. I understood it all. The family assumed they had the upper hand, that their laughter and subtle jabs would unsettle me, but I refused to participate in their performance. I didn't argue, I didn't explain, I didn't try to impress. I simply observed, waiting for the moment where appearances would meet reality. Eventually, it was time for the charity auction. The venue was a private hall, ornate and filled with fine art, rare collectibles, and luxury items. My wife's family had meticulously planned the layout, the guest list, the presentation of each lot. They expected to demonstrate sophistication, wealth, and influence, and they assumed their amusement at my simple arrival would carry into the event. The auction hall was a spectacle. Crystal chandeliers glittered above, marble floors reflected the warm lighting, and the tables held the most exquisite items imaginable. I entered quietly, unnoticed at first. Those same relatives who had mocked me hours ago barely registered my presence. Their assumption was that they had already won the psychological game. I seated myself calmly, keeping posture neutral, eyes scanning the room. When the auctioneer began, I acted methodically. One lot at a time, I placed bids, not loud, not boastful, but precise. Each successful bid drew glances. Eyebrows rose, murmurs spread. The family's amusement was replaced with curiosity. The whispers that once ridiculed me now carried disbelief. My calm, deliberate action began to shift the room's perception. When the highlight lot, a rare painting, was presented, the room went silent. I raised my bid discreetly. All eyes turned toward me. Shock replaced their whispers. The family that had mocked me earlier now found themselves watching intently. My unassuming presence and careful bidding revealed a quiet authority. The laughter, the judgment, the mockery, they all faded. By the end of the auction, I had secured multiple high-value items. The family's expressions were a mixture of disbelief, awe, and grudging respect. My wife's gaze met mine briefly, a combination of surprise and acknowledgement. The man they had assumed was humble and powerless had quietly demonstrated his capability, his composure, and his strength. As I left, I understood something fundamental. Appearances deceive. Quiet confidence, patience, and strategy often speak louder than wealth, status, or arrogance. Never underestimate someone who seems ordinary. True power lies in composure, planning, and the ability to act decisively when others are distracted by assumptions. The day after my bus ride to my wife's family home began with a strange quiet. Even the streets seemed to recognize the tension I carried, the subtle weight of yesterday's humiliation lingering in the air. I could feel the invisible judgment pressing down, a reminder of the laughter, the smirks, and the whispered ridicule from my in-laws. But I did not flinch, nor did I show any sign of weakness. Today was mine to navigate with precision. I approached the venue for the charity auction with deliberate calm. The private hall was opulent. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and a ceiling high enough to make the room feel infinite. Wealthy patrons arrived in luxury cars, polished shoes clicking against marble, their clothes immaculate and carefully selected. Their chatter was polite but laced with subtle judgment. I moved through it unnoticed at first, blending into the background, my unassuming presence belying the strategic intent I carried with me. Inside, my wife's family had already arrived. The same faces that had laughed at my bus ride were here, dressed in tailored suits and designer dresses, their expressions carefully curated. They assumed superiority, expecting my humility and quiet composure to fail under scrutiny. But they underestimated the quiet confidence I had cultivated over years of calculated patience and observation. I found a seat strategically positioned so that I could observe the room, the crowd, and, most importantly, my wife's family. My demeanor was calm, yet deliberate. I did not speak unnecessarily. I did not seek to impress. Each subtle movement, each carefully measured reaction was a statement in itself. The air around me shifted imperceptibly as the family began to notice my composed posture, my steady gaze, my lack of agitation. Their laughter and whispers faltered as they realized I would not react the way they expected. The auctioneer's voice rang out, announcing the first lot, a rare and delicate sculpture, centuries old. I raised my paddle in a controlled motion, discreet yet confident. The bid was accepted. Eyebrows rose, whispers passed among the guests, and my in-laws exchanged uneasy glances. Their overconfidence began to waver, subtle yet perceptible. My quiet action had begun to dismantle the assumptions they had built about me. The auction continued, each lot presenting an opportunity to demonstrate calm authority. I did not shout, I did not flaunt, but with each strategic bid, attention began to shift. Guests who had dismissed me initially leaned forward, intrigued. They could not understand how a man arriving by bus, modest and unassuming, could now hold sway over high-value items without a single overt display of dominance. My wife's family observed, their prior smugness replaced by confusion and silent calculation. Hours passed, and the tension in the room became palpable. The highlight lot was announced, a priceless painting renowned for both its history and rarity. The room fell silent as the auctioneer called for bids. I raised my paddle slowly, deliberately. The audience gasped, the family froze. My calm composure had drawn all eyes. The laughter, the ridicule, the dismissive glances from the morning, they vanished. The man they had underestimated was now undeniably in control. I continued to place bids methodically. Each move was deliberate, precise, and unwavering. I was not competing for attention. I was asserting quiet dominance through action. The contrast between my unassuming appearance and the authority I projected through my calm, calculated behavior created a ripple of astonishment throughout the hall. Even the most skeptical guests could not deny my presence and influence. By the end of the auction, I had secured multiple high-value lots. The room, once buzzing with polite chatter and subtle judgments, was now filled with quiet astonishment. My wife's family, who had ridiculed my arrival, could only sit in stunned silence. Their assumptions had been shattered, replaced with the undeniable reality that appearances can deceive. The modest man who arrived by bus had demonstrated composure, strategy, and quiet confidence that no one could ignore. As I left the hall, the family's gaze followed me. My wife's eyes met mine for a fleeting moment, a mixture of shock, acknowledgement, and perhaps admiration. They had witnessed firsthand that patience, strategic action, and unwavering composure can command respect far more effectively than arrogance or overt displays of wealth. Outside, the sun had begun its descent, casting golden light across the skyline. I paused, reflecting on the lessons of the day. True strength is often quiet. True power is demonstrated through action, patience, and the ability to remain calm when underestimated. The family had judged me superficially, but reality had shown them the man I truly was, capable, composed, and quietly influential. Walking away, I understood that the day had shifted more than just the outcome of the auction. It had shifted perceptions, shattered arrogance, and subtly realigned the dynamics of respect. My actions spoke louder than any words, and in doing so, I had ensured that those who had mocked me would never forget the lesson of quiet power and strategic patience. The morning after the auction, I woke with a strange sense of calm, yet the memory of the previous day's tension lingered like a shadow. The city outside was alive with its usual chaos, unaware of the silent victory that had occurred inside that auction hall. I took a deep breath, adjusted my bag, and walked toward my wife's family home. Every step felt deliberate, as if each footfall carried the weight of yesterday's revelations. As I approached the house, the family was already gathered. Their expressions were cautious, tense, and subtly amazed. The laughter and mockery of my bus arrival were gone, replaced by whispers of disbelief and quiet reassessment. My father-in-law's brow furrowed, trying to maintain authority, but the faint twitch of surprise in his eyes betrayed his acknowledgement of what had transpired. My mother-in-law's smile was tight and measured, lacking the usual smugness. Cousins and relatives exchanged glances, attempting to decipher the man who had arrived humbly, yet commanded silent authority at the auction. Inside, the house felt smaller than usual, the air thick with anticipation. My wife stood near the window, observing me with a mixture of pride, awe, and subtle apprehension. The quiet power I had demonstrated at the auction had not gone unnoticed. I walked calmly through the foyer, greeting no one, and allowed my presence alone to communicate the message. Appearances could be deceiving, and patience can quietly reshape perception. The conversation began slowly. My wife spoke first, her voice tentative. I didn't expect you to handle the auction so effectively, she admitted. Her words reflected surprise and the realization that the man she had underestimated was capable of far more than she had imagined. It wasn't about impressing anyone, I replied, my tone calm and deliberate. It was about demonstrating composure, patience, and strategic thinking. True respect is earned through actions, not assumptions or appearances. Her father leaned forward, curiosity mingled with caution. You had planned all of this, hadn't you? He asked. I prepared, I said evenly. I anticipated the judgment, the mockery, and the dismissal. Each action yesterday was deliberate, each decision calculated. Assumptions blind judgment, and patience, composure, and intelligence can overturn them. The room fell into quiet observation. The subtle power I displayed unsettled the family, who had assumed my bus ride and modest appearance were signs of weakness. They now faced the reality that I had orchestrated a quiet, undeniable command of authority at the auction. Even my wife's siblings, who had whispered ridicule the day before, now observed me silently, recognizing that strength does not always require display. It can be expressed through controlled, deliberate actions. Hours passed as we discussed the auction, each lot, and my reasoning behind every bid. My wife's questions were careful, deliberate, seeking to understand the intelligence and strategy behind my actions. I explained calmly, reinforcing the subtle but undeniable lessons of the day. Patience and composure are powerful, and calculated action commands more respect than wealth or appearance alone. By mid-afternoon, the family's demeanor had shifted subtly but clearly. Their skepticism had diminished, their initial judgment replaced by quiet recognition. My wife's eyes met mine with a hint of admiration. Cousins and relatives, once confident in their superiority, now assessed me differently, silently acknowledging the deliberate authority I wielded. Finally, the discussion turned toward relationships, respect, and perception. I emphasized that the man who had been underestimated, who arrived by bus, dressed modestly, was not defined by appearances, but by action and composure. They listened quietly, absorbing the lesson in a way words alone could never have delivered. As evening approached, I stood near the window, looking out over the city skyline. The glow of the setting sun cast warm light across the room. I felt a sense of quiet satisfaction. The family had witnessed the subtle, undeniable influence of patience and strategy. I had entered underestimated and dismissed, and I left with calm authority, dignity intact, and respect quietly earned. Even as night fell, the lesson remained. Appearances deceive, patience is power, and the quiet, calculated individual often commands more influence than anyone expects. Yesterday had transformed their perception, and the change would linger long after the auction's echo had faded. The morning after the tense confrontations in the auction, the house felt different. The air was thick, not with laughter or ridicule this time, but with quiet reflection. The silence seemed to stretch and hover around every corner, as if every wall had absorbed the lessons of yesterday. I moved slowly through the rooms, observing the subtle changes in the family's demeanor. Faces that had mocked, judged, or dismissed me were now cautious, tentative, as though they were discovering a man they had never truly known. I found my wife in the living room, sitting with her hands folded, her posture slightly tense but composed. Her eyes met mine, and in that fleeting glance, I saw something I hadn't seen in months, a mix of acknowledgement, hesitation, and recognition. I didn't speak immediately. I allowed the silence to fill the space, letting the weight of yesterday settle in both of our minds. Sometimes words are unnecessary when comprehension has already arrived. Finally, she spoke softly. I didn't realize how much you understood what was happening, or how capable you are, she admitted, her voice carrying the tremor of realization. I thought that by testing you, by giving ultimatums or creating tension, I would see where your loyalty or obedience lay. But I see now that I misjudged you entirely. I nodded slowly, keeping my calm, deliberate composure. It's not about proving loyalty or obedience, I said evenly. It's about mutual respect, understanding, and the quiet decisions we make when circumstances test us. Yesterday was not a display of strength for anyone else's approval. It was a measure of patience, composure, and the understanding that appearances can be deceiving. She leaned back slightly, exhaling slowly. I thought I knew you. I thought I understood you, but yesterday, and even today, I see there is more to you than I ever realized. Her hands trembled faintly as she placed them on her lap. I don't want to lose sight of that again. The conversation grew deeper, moving beyond the auction and the tension of appearances. We spoke of intentions, trust, and the unspoken assumptions that had built over time. I explained carefully, showing not pride, but clarity, not arrogance, but measured reasoning. The family, who had once laughed at my humble arrival, now listened intently. Their expressions shifted from disbelief to contemplation as they realized the subtle power of quiet confidence and calculated patience. Hours passed, and as we moved toward the terrace overlooking the city skyline, the air seemed lighter. My wife stood by the railing, watching the world below. I didn't realize how much I underestimated you, she said, almost whispering, as if speaking her thought aloud made it real. I thought modesty or humility meant weakness, but you've shown me something different. Strength isn't loud, it's deliberate, patient, and consistent. I smiled faintly, acknowledging her words without comment. The silence between us was no longer tense. It was reflective, a shared understanding of boundaries, respect, and the lessons learned from being underestimated. My in-laws, cousins, and family members were nearby, observing but giving us space. They no longer carried the mockery or superiority that had dominated their expressions the day before. Their whispers were subdued, their postures reflective, as if recognizing a truth they could not deny. Later, we sat together at a small table on the terrace, coffee cups steaming gently in the morning air. The conversation continued, shifting toward reconciliation and the steps needed to maintain respect and understanding. Every word exchanged was measured, honest, and purposeful. I realized then that resolution does not require victory or dominance. It requires recognition, patience, and calm communication. The family's perspective had shifted quietly but profoundly. They understood that the man they had underestimated, the one arriving by bus, dressed modestly, dismissed casually, was far more capable, composed, and strategic than they had imagined. Even the cousins who had whispered scorn now regarded me with cautious respect. My wife, too, seemed to see a different side of me, the one that had quietly turned mockery into acknowledgement, judgment into recognition. As the sun rose higher, casting warm golden light across the city skyline, the lesson of the day was clear. Appearances deceive, patience is power, and calm, deliberate action can command respect more effectively than arrogance, wealth, or outward show. The auction had not just demonstrated my capability, it had demonstrated the power of quiet composure and strategic patience. By midday, the house was alive again, but with a different energy. Conversations were polite, reflective, and careful. My wife and I exchanged a final glance, a silent acknowledgement of what had transpired. The family's expressions, once mocking or dismissive, now contained a subtle hint of admiration. The laughter and ridicule of yesterday had been replaced with quiet respect, a recognition that strength is not always loud and that patience often yields the most powerful outcomes. Finally, as I stepped onto the balcony once more, overlooking the sprawling city, I understood the full impact of these events. I had entered underestimated, dismissed, and mocked. I left commanding respect and acknowledgement, not through confrontation, not through anger, not through overt display, but through patience, composure, and deliberate, intelligent action. The lesson was indelible. Never underestimate a person based on appearances, because true strength reveals itself when least expected. The day had finally settled into a quiet evening. The tension that had dominated the past weeks, the subtle tests, the auctions, and the confrontations, all seemed to converge into this single moment. I stood near the balcony, looking at the city skyline. The golden light of the sunset reflected off the glass buildings, softening the edges of a day that had been anything but gentle. Inside, the house was calm but alert. My wife moved silently, adjusting papers on the desk, her eyes betraying the conflict she felt. She had expected me to falter at the auction, to be embarrassed by her family, by appearances, by the judgment that had once been so constant. Yet every action I had taken, every measured decision, had left her and her family in stunned silence. She had seen a side of me she had not anticipated, the quiet, composed, deliberate man who did not react out of emotion, but acted with intention. I walked inside, each step deliberate, measured, and calm. My presence alone carried the weight of yesterday's lessons. The room's occupants, who had once whispered and smirked, now observed me with quiet attention. Their confidence had shifted, their laughter had vanished. It was a subtle, unspoken acknowledgement of the quiet authority I had demonstrated. I approached my wife and spoke softly. Yesterday, the auction, the reactions, it wasn't about showing off or proving something to anyone. It was about patience, composure, and understanding. Strength isn't always loud or visible. It's deliberate, calculated, and quiet. She nodded slowly, eyes softened, lips slightly parted. I see that now, she said. I didn't realize how much you understood or how much control you maintained in the situation. I gestured toward the items I had acquired at the auction. It wasn't about the items themselves. Each action, each choice was a reflection of understanding, of anticipation, and of quiet control. Yesterday proved that assumptions can be wrong, and respect is earned through consistency and calm composure, not appearances. The family listened in silence, absorbing each word. Their faces had shifted from shock to contemplation, disbelief to acknowledgement. My wife's gaze held a subtle respect, a recognition that the man they had underestimated was far more capable than they had assumed. Cousins who had once whispered and laughed were now still, processing the quiet power of observation and action. Hours passed as we discussed the events, the auction, and the lessons learned. My wife asked questions, genuinely curious about my decisions, my patience, and my strategy. I answered without arrogance, calmly, deliberately. It was a dialogue of understanding, not confrontation. As the evening deepened, I felt a quiet sense of victory, not a triumph over wealth or status, but a victory over assumptions, over judgment, and over the superficial expectations of others. The family had been forced to reevaluate their perception. They had witnessed that quiet composure and deliberate action can command respect in ways arrogance never could. Finally, as night fell, I stood on the balcony again. The city lights sparkled below, indifferent yet beautiful. I felt a calm satisfaction. The lessons of patience, quiet authority, and strategic action had been demonstrated fully. I had entered underestimated, dismissed, and mocked. I left commanding respect, maintaining dignity, and reinforcing the power of calm, deliberate decision-making. This was not just the end of the auction or the confrontations. It was the resolution of assumptions, the assertion of self-respect, and the demonstration that appearances are often deceptive. True strength reveals itself quietly, subtly, and irrevocably. The night was calm. The city continued its indifferent rhythm, and I knew, finally, that the story had reached closure. Not through shouting, not through dramatics, but through patience, observation, and deliberate action that left an undeniable mark.